Testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, good evening, everyone. We have a great crowd for Ken's session today. So we're excited to be back in person since the pandemic started. We have a bit of a light crowd here today, but we have 300 people watching online, which is fantastic. It's 300, right, Ken? That's
Seriously?
what I said?
Yeah, okay. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, and so Ken verifies it, so it must be true. So this is our first event back, and we're very happy to not be holed up in our caves at home. And we have a great presentation from Ken tonight. I'm going to have to step off camera and do this. And as usual, we'd like to thank our sponsors for making it possible to have Ken down here and to have the venue. And normally we have food and pizza and all that kind of stuff, but we didn't do that because of the pandemic and some pandemic protocols that we are trying to make everyone comfortable with as we start getting back to in-person events. So anyways, thanks to our sponsors. And the first sponsor, actually, I work at now, Azul Systems. So, yeah, we make a great JVM. You should come check it out. So what we typically do is we have a small discussion before we get started about just some Java news, and we don't probably have a lot of folks in the audience hiring today, but we are exactly, I think, 4 weeks away from Java 17, which is the next LTS release coming out. So that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that for a number of different reasons, but it's September 14th is when it comes out. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that right? Okay. So yeah, so that's just around the corner. It is an LTS release, so that'll be fun. Has anyone tried out Java 17 yet? No? Okay, Glenn has. Does it work? Okay. Okay, excellent. So at least 2 people, including me, have tried it so far, and it does seem to work, which is great. Of course, that's a joke. Because the Java releases are built up to LTS releases so that they are well tested, and with the release cadence of every 6 months, it gives people ample opportunity to go and upgrade and try everything out. So is there any other Java news that folks want to mention in the Java universe since we met last? You got anything for us, Ken? Have you seen anything interesting?
I'll have the mic in a minute.
Okay. Oh, you're live right now, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hi. Go ahead.
You can't see Ken, he's off camera. He's getting
I'm
ready.
disappointed about one Java 17 thing, is that Java 15 came out on the 15th of the month, and 16 came out on the 16th of the month. I can't believe they're coming out on the 14th.
Oh, that's
Java
true.
17.
They could have had Java 17 come out on the 17th of the month, I know.
I mean, you know.
We'll have to speak to our people at Oracle and try to get them back on the cadence for that, right? So
You do that, I'll just watch.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to Ken's presentation here in just a sec. We are going to do a book signing, not here, but at either Taco Mac or Hobnob, depending on which location has enough space for us. Since we have such a massive audience, we may have to split into 2, but we'll see how that goes tonight. Utsu, don't turn the camera in that direction, okay? So, but we will do a book signing. We have plenty of books to give away here. We will have to find a Sharpie, though, Ken, because I haven't found a Sharpie yet. But yeah, so we'll do a quick book signing. And without further ado, Ken will talk about managing your manager, also known as how to help your manager help you. So, is that right? Is that the title of the book, or did I get completely wrong?
Well, not completely wrong.
Okay.
There are some words that line up, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, is it not on?
Uh-oh. We're going to do a quick mic check here.
See, it was on. It says
Testing.
it's on.
Testing.
Testing, 1, 2. Is it working now? Yeah. Do I need to move it up? Okay. All right.
All right. Without further ado, Ken, for managing your manager.
I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Sorry about the technical issues there, but it's all nicely resolved. So thank you to the hundreds of people in the room, all masked and nicely socially distanced. And for the live stream people, welcome to both of you. Actually, I don't know how many people are there, but we lost the visual. Okay. Pratik is right. This started off as a presentation on the No Fluff, Just Stuff conference tour called Managing Your Manager. And I always thought of it as Managing Your Manager, and that was the title through, a video course I recorded and through training courses I teach on based on this on the O'Reilly Learning Platform. I've been using this for years. And then I had a friend who wound up an editor at Pragmatic Programmers, and I'd always been threatening to turn this into book form. And I had this promise to her that, hey, look, I've been giving this talk for years. All I got to do is translate it into text. It's going to be really quick. All you just got to do is write it down. And she was nice enough not to roll her eyes, but we went along with it. And then, of course, in the process of writing it, everything changed. And there's all this depth now and all this extra information that I didn't have originally. So it's been an adventure. The book has been out for a little less than a month now, a few weeks. During the process, they did a search, and apparently I was not allowed to call the book Managing Your Manager. And therefore, I called the guy who wrote the foreword for the book, Glenn Vanderberg. You may know him. Good Java guy. And we spent an hour bandying titles back and forth. I don't know. I wanted to call it like How to Employee and things like that. So it got rather silly. And eventually we settled on this, Help Your Boss Help You, is the basic idea. And it's funny when I tell people the title, especially if they knew the previous title, The Managing Your Manager, I see the same reaction in everybody. They're all like, oh, really? They're not unhappy, but they're like, that's nowhere near as good. And then over the course of approximately 5 minutes, they talk themselves into it. Oh, actually, it does kind of make sense. That is what you're doing. Yeah, I could see that. Okay. And you can just watch it happen in slow motion. The question is, will it happen quickly enough for impulse buys on Pragmatic Programmer's website? All right, let's get on to the actual material. One thing I do want to show, however, is this is the Amazon page. And new releases in business communication, it's sitting there at number 1. I'm afraid to refresh the page. Yeah. Thank you. I'll refresh the page, and still number 1. I only check it not constantly. They update this hourly, but more than a reasonable person would consider healthy. I do have to admit that. It's also number 1, or was, under business ethics, which sounds like an oxymoron, right? Like military intelligence or working vacation, it's something like that. But there it is, and the reason I want it to be number 1 is because you get this nice little emblem up here. How nice is that? Number 1, new release. I have no idea, 0 idea what that translates to in number of sales. I'll know in about a month. Don't they realize this is internet time? I want to know now. And they update this thing every hour, and it goes away. I keep seeing it drop down to 3 and 4, and then suddenly it'll bump up to 1 because, Pratik will buy a copy or something. I'm guessing that's it. All right, now, on to something a bit closer to what we want to talk about. Oh, and by the way, I will give you a coupon code. It won't work at Amazon, but it'll work at Pragmatic Programmers. You can get the ebook. I'll give you a coupon code for a 35% discount for that. But the Amazon one is just Amazon. So at any rate, these are my previous books. My name's Ken Cousin. It's cousin like the relative. It just doesn't look like it, There's my email address, homepage, blog, Twitter handle, and I write a free weekly newsletter called Tales from the Jar Side, which I publish on Substack. And that's actually where the coupon code is. I'll have to go there and grab it so I can show it to you. Those are the books I've written in the past. I've written on Java-based languages. In addition to Java, I've written on Groovy and Kotlin and even a bit on Gradle with Android. So this is the first book I've written that is, well, let's say it this way. There was no spec. So it was all kind of just made up out of my head, which was the scary part. Now, let me give you the quick elevator pitch, which is basically almost every book on management is written for managers. It's written for managers to help them rise through the ranks, to move up to the so-called C-level suite, CEO, CIO, that sort of thing. There's almost nothing written for what I call working professionals, people who are coders or actuaries or accountants or doctors, whatever, who care more about their job than necessarily rising through the hierarchy of an organization. That even though they're open to that later, that right now they're focused on their technical goals, what they care about. They want to write things in a way that they're proud of, that they care about, do things the right way. And yet we have to deal with managers all the time. We have no choice. So everything in here is based on how do we build that relationship with a manager, especially the low-level managers we tend to encounter, that still lets us get what we want in our job. Now, the problem is that conflict with those levels of management is inevitable. It has to happen because we want different things. Again, we care about the technical aspects of the job, and their reward structure, their incentives, as they say, are slightly different. Now, there's an overlap. I mean, otherwise, why are we working together? But there are differences. So the first question comes down to, what is it that you want? What do you want out of your job, your career, your life? You know, and people have been dealing with that question forever. This is an old picture of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs from psychology. It's been refined over the years. It's still arguably an oversimplification, but most models are, right? And the basic concept here, I know that's hard to read, is that at the bottom of the pyramid, you have needs like physiological needs and then safety and things like that. And as you move up, you could start looking at things like esteem, feelings of accomplishment, and self-actualization. So the point is that if you are not sure where your next meal is coming from, or you're not sure where you're going to be staying the night, that dominates everything, and that career success is not something you can worry about until the lower levels are satisfied. So let's assume that we're above that when we're talking about what you want at work. What do you want from your job? Not necessarily true, but let's start with that assumption. So there's lots of comments on that too. There's an old comment from attributed to Aristotle that says, happiness, if you want to be happy, is the exercise of vital powers along lines of excellence in a life affording them scope. And the way I've interpreted that is what most of us want from our job is a career that provides autonomy. You want freedom to make choices, to make technical decisions, to follow your ideas, to do what you think is right, in a job that allows you to play to your strengths. I mean, I've been in jobs that played to my weaknesses, and it's no fun, you know? And you want a job that rewards you for doing what you are attracted to doing and what you do well, and also gives you the opportunity to learn and develop. I mean, we know in the IT field, of course, you're always learning because there's always something new out there. And we're always making the decision as to whether this is worth my time and energy, or whether I should stay the course in what I'm going on and what's going to be next. And we're learning all the time. Interestingly, these are known as intrinsic motivations. They have nothing to do with reward structure from outside. These are all things that drive us personally. And that's interesting. Now, the assumption here, as I mentioned, is that you are what I like to call a working professional. You care about your career and doing the job in whatever the right way means, building results that you can be proud of, that also hopefully earn you respect from your peers and, if ideally, rewards as well. Although, again, that's secondary. It's really building things that make you feel like you did a good thing, you know, that you did it right, you did something you think is worthwhile and important. So then the question is, well, wait a minute, what does your manager want? Don't they want the exact same things you do? And the answer is, well, yes, as long as those things make money for the company. Because that's one of the biggest changes that happens when people move into management. It could be a technical person promoted into management, or someone who came into management as a career, is that they have to care about a lot of things that we don't even want to deal with. And a lot of that stuff has to do with financial performance of the team, the group, or the company as a whole. Your manager's job is therefore different from our job, and they are evaluated differently than we are, which means ultimately their priorities and incentives are different from ours, which means that conflict sooner or later is inevitable. Now, when I say money, again, I'm talking about money for the company. I'm not talking about salary. Everybody would like more in salary. That's not a difference, except Pratik. But other than that, we would all like to be rewarded more for our accomplishments. But the thing is that managers care about money more than most professionals do. Professionals have other things they care about just as much. And again, I'm not talking about salary. I'm talking about, is this group making money? Is my task making money for the company? We have that in the back of our head. They are evaluated on that. It's part of their compensation. And the higher you go in an organization, the more managers care about that. I have a friend who I've known for many years. He's a retired senior vice president at a big division of a Fortune 500 company. Okay, this was a senior guy. The only way I even knew about him is my wife and his wife went to school together. I mean, it just happened to meet socially. But that made it, I worked in the same company, but in a completely different division, and therefore we could talk about these things. And he would admit that if a technical problem actually reached his level, the senior vice president level, then he'd have a meeting with all of his direct reports and the relevant people, and the entire meeting was, what is this going to cost me? What do I have to spend to buy my way out of this problem? Is this a component we have to purchase off the shelf? Is this something where we're going to have to pay a fine or a penalty? Is this something where we're going to have to hire a bunch of people to fix this? But it was all money, money, money. That was the dominant decision process. Now, when the meeting would end, the technical people would go to this guy and say, hey, do you want to know the actual technical details, some of the ins and outs? Well, that company always promoted from within, so he had an engineering background like they did. It was many years ago, but he was interested in the technical stuff. But the important point is that was a completely secondary discussion to the financial one. And the higher the manager you deal with, the more they've got that money process, that money evaluation, that money thought in the back of their mind. There's a story I read once about a famous actor, I tell you who it was, I just don't remember, who was directing a film for the first time. Because actors want to be directors like developers think they want to, that being a manager will give them more control over their lives, good luck with that. And this guy was directing a film. Now, of course, the other actors on the film knew this guy as an actor. So they wanted to have actor discussions. How are we building this scene? What's the backstory here? What's the motivation? And of course, he was an actor. He loved having discussions like that. But as a director, he said in the back of his mind was this constant refrain. We're losing the light. We're going to have to pay the crew extra. Got to build the dailies. Got to talk to the investors. Money, money, money coming through the whole time. And it was in the back of his mind. And it was a surprise to him to have to deal with that all the time. So the way I reduce it is to a nice little Venn diagram. I think this way. You have an agenda for your life, your career, your job. Your manager has an agenda as well for their life, for their career, their job. And most of the time these things overlap or we wouldn't be working together at all. But these still happen. And we have to acknowledge that they happen and then plan for it. Because the biggest problem, and this is coming up later, but I'll mention it now, the biggest problem that people face, technical professionals, is that they think if they get into a conflict with their manager, they have only two choices. They can either just go along with what the manager tells them to do, or they can leave. And both of those are extreme solutions, and neither of them gets you what you want, which is to train your manager to take what you want into account when they're making decisions. Now, it's easy to think of this. I mean, you go to a conference, you go to a user group meeting, you learn about a new framework, you learn about Vue.js, you learn about a language like Kotlin, you learn about whatever. You learn about something interesting, you think, hey, I want to apply this to my job. And you think, oh, great, if I go to my boss and say, hey, I want to carve off a piece of our project and do it in Kotlin, they're going to go, why? And you don't have a lot of good reasons yet. You just thought it was cool at the meeting. And there are reasons. It looks good. Of course, you have nobody to ask questions to, so there's going to be problems. And you'd love to do it, but you're introducing all this risk into the project. And that's going to be a very hard sell. So what you might be tempted to do, or maybe not you, but I would be tempted, is to carve off a little piece of the project and do it on my own time, whatever that means, And of course it'll creep into work time because after all it's a work project. I guess that's okay. And then let's pick the happy path. Everything works And then you have a meeting with the whole team and the manager and say, hey, look what I did, and you minimize all the problems you ran into on the way there and show them how great this is. Now, if you're lucky, your manager's response to that is, oh, cool, because now they have a new capability in the team that they could market to the rest of the company or to outsiders, whatever it is. And great, it works really well, it's a nice advantage, but you've also introduced a single point of failure into the project, that being you. And the manager's like, okay, what happens if this guy gets busy? Either because this stuff turns out to be really popular and everybody wants him to do it, or he decides to look at something else because he's just demonstrated he's willing to go off on his own and pick something else without telling anybody, you know, or they leave, you know. So the manager decides, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring in this junior person who we've been training anyway, and I'm going to assign them to you. You bring them up to speed on this new framework, this new language, whatever it is, show them how it works so they can maintain it and work on projects if you're not available. Now, of course, what I hear when somebody says that to me is, oh, great, now let's train a lower cost, more flexible replacement for you. So that in case you're not around, and who knows why you might not be around, I got somebody to cover for you. And it's like, whoa, you know, now both sides did things that were perfectly natural and understandable for their own personal goals, and yet we wind up with a conflict. We wind up with a problem because our priorities are different. So what do you do about it? There's another added complication, by the way. There's a couple. First of all, your manager's probably not very good at their job. And there's a reason for this. It's kind of an obvious reason once you think about it. As technical people, whatever your technical field may be, you're not in the management hierarchy. Now, I'm not talking about being a tech lead. Tech leads and team members have very similar goals. There's not really a lot of conflict there. A tech lead just has additional responsibilities for scheduling and you know, bigger problems on the project. I'm talking about a line manager, someone who wants their career to be in management, who's to rise through the ranks through a high level. Well, as technical people, we're not dealing with the real good ones. The real good ones, the ones who actually have the talent to rise through the ranks, are going to move up. Or if not, they'll look for an opportunity elsewhere. People like that are always looking for the next opportunity, either in the company or somewhere else. So if you get a really good manager, enjoy it, because it won't last. I mean, after all, for good reasons, they are that good. And by the way, you don't need a lot of advice on how to work for a good manager. They'll tell you. You know, they'll explain to you, this is how I prefer to do things, and this is why, and let's talk about it, and let's meet every week, and all these normal things. So instead, we deal with the lowest rung, the least experienced people who are also potentially the least proficient, maybe because they're not experienced, or maybe because they are never will be's rather than not yets, you know? And of course they're going to look bad to us. And then you combine it with the fact that everybody in a company has to act like they know what they're doing. Now, I don't want to overemphasize that. It's not like you lie. It's that if you don't show confidence in your own skills, nobody trusts you with their work. You know, the boss doesn't want to give you work to do if you're showing how scared you are that you can accomplish it, you know. The other divisions don't want to give your company work. It's really a problem. And this is even more true for managers who have to persuade all these technical people to do what they say, even when they know they're not as good technically as their own employees. I mean, they shouldn't be. They have you. Why do they also need to be the technical expert? They just need to understand what you tell them. Okay? But they're making decisions that are unrelated to the technical expertise or have concerns that go beyond the technical aspects of the problem. They also know, most of them, that they're not great at this. I mean, there is the whole Dunning-Kruger effect you've probably heard of. The Dunning-Kruger effect, where someone acts like they're phenomenal at something despite all evidence to the contrary. Okay? But that's an exceptional case. That's unusual. That's a psychological problem. And I'm not saying we won't run into those people. I've certainly run into a couple of them. But most people act like they know what they're doing because it's a survival skill. You know, that I have to persuade people. I have to act like I'm confident, even when internally they're going, but I don't know, I could be completely wrong. You know, that senior vice president would say, he would make decisions. The higher you go, the worse this gets. He would have to make decisions about relocating an entire division and affecting hundreds of families. potentially real problems, and he's got in the back of his mind, what if I'm wrong? What if this isn't a thing we have to do? And yet, you have to make a decision, and you have to act like you're confident that this is the right thing to do, or you're only going to cause more problems for yourself. So if your manager isn't that great, I mean, is it any wonder that IT people get a low opinion of management if we're dealing with rookies who act like they know more than they know? I mean, we automatically rebel against something like that. And yet, your best approach to success in any hierarchical organization is your manager needs to be your advocate. You need that person to argue for you in the meetings that you're not attending. Things like for raises or promotions or even getting new projects, or if a problem goes wrong, you need them arguing on your behalf. That's your best ally. So we need that relationship somehow. So if they're not that great, what do we do about it? What can we do about it? So I define this in terms of two terms I'm going to use a lot. One is trust and one is loyalty. But I have to put a caveat on these things. Trust and loyalty have heavy emotional implications, a lot of context there. I'm not talking about the type of trust you would give to a spouse or a family member or even just a good friend. I'm talking about a professional level of trust. What do we trust them to do for us? What do they trust us to do for them? That's where the relationship is. It's not one that won't have conflicts in it. It's one that has a certain level of effort that we are both sides expecting. For example, we trust them to fight those organizational battles that we don't want to fight. I hated arguing for funding, to say my project should get funding when it was, there's not enough funding to go around, and why should my project get it and this person over there shouldn't get it, when I don't even really understand what they're doing. Why is that something I should argue? I don't want to make that argument. I'd rather we all get funded, and in good times, maybe we all do, but how often does that last either? We want the manager to fight these organizational battles on our behalf. We want them to look out for our best interests. If an opportunity comes along they know we're interested in, we may not hear about it unless they tell us, right? Most jobs are not filled by advertising. They're filled by somebody knowing somebody and hearing about an opportunity. Or a project comes in, hey, you might want to get in on this, or you might want to talk to this person. We trust them to do that for us. We also trust them to defend us when problems arise. And I've been in this too many times to think about. Sometimes it's not my fault, sometimes it is. Like I was on a project once where my expertise before I was in IT had to do with, I was a research scientist and I worked on aerodynamics of jet engines. It sounds great and it was really cool when it worked. In reality, it was lots of math and lots of Fortran. The nightmares have ended, but it took a while, And the problem is a lot of my funding for that work came from another division of the company. Well, a manager in that division decided to form his own group to do that work. And therefore, the money wasn't going to come over to me anymore. That's a crisis for me, because I was not going to have funding. What I needed, and fortunately had, was a manager at the same level, a peer of the manager in the division, who could have a discussion and get me in the room, so that I could make the argument of how we could work together and how I could still help out and work on the things they couldn't do or weren't interested in and help them build up expertise. I mean, I had arguments to make, but in a hierarchical organization, there was a power disparity and I needed someone to help me be heard. Very important. We all need allies in an organization, and my manager in that case was. Now, there were other times when I messed up and went over budget or did something that was wrong, and then I needed my manager to step in and say, yeah, despite what this evidence is, he's not a complete idiot. It'll be all right. We'll fix it. I need somebody to argue on my behalf that, I know he sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about, but it'll be okay, etc. We also trust them to get the resources that we need. Now, this happens a lot with new managers, because new managers are suddenly being evaluated on financial issues, and therefore their default reaction is to say no to all money requests. Hey, I've been using Eclipse all this time. Eclipse is getting old and clunky, and IntelliJ IDEA is so much better, but I need a license. Wait, there's a free alternative? No. You know what I mean? It's like that, don't even think about it, because they're being evaluated on money now and everything scares them, and they need to understand that the phrase penny wise and pound foolish. You know, how many hours a day are you spending in front of this thing, divide by n, yeah, okay, we're fine. You know, good managers learn that it's okay. Rookies or not very good managers need to learn that. So we trust that they will get us the resources we need if we make an argument for it. In general, we trust them to support us in our career, that they know what we want, they help us build toward that, even if it's a long-term goal. Now, what do they trust us to do? Well, two major things I want to mention. They trust us to do our job to the best of our ability. Now, that sounds obvious, but it is important to point out, especially because most of the time, a manager knows that you don't know how to do every step of the task they're handing you. I mean, if you did, you're doing the same task you've already done a dozen times, and you don't hire professionals for tasks like that. Anybody could do that. They hire you to work on hard problems, things we don't know how to solve, things we need to evaluate. So they know you're going to give it your best shot, and that's what they want. They want to know that you'll do the best, and you'll let them know if there are issues early enough, hopefully, to replan if necessary, to rebuild and compensate and make sure we deal with those problems as we go. This is the more subtle one, however. They trust us to support their decisions throughout the organization. That doesn't mean you always agree with their decisions. I mean, any number of times we won't. But publicly, to the outside world, we're a team. We use terms like that. We decided to do X, Y, or Z. And of course, everybody's going to know who really made the decision, you know? But we back them up. We have their back, as the phrase would go. I call this loyalty. The problem with loyalty, again, it has a real emotional content to it. I really want to build a relationship based on constructive loyalty. I want a loyalty relationship that still allows me to push back, to argue, to say no, to say this is a bad idea, directly in a way that doesn't threaten the loyalty relationship. Again, we support them, they look out for us. You do not accomplish this, incidentally, by just doing what they tell you to do. And yet, that's what the company would want you to do, because normally the manager's incentives and the company's goals are more closely aligned than ours, because the company's thinking about money, and so is the manager. We have career and technical goals that are different from what they're thinking about. I mean, otherwise no manager would ever tell you, no, we can't do an elegant solution here, we just have to get something done, meet a deadline. See, they're thinking company goals. So if you went to the company and said, my manager told me to do this and I think it's a mistake, the company's almost certainly going to go, yeah, do what the manager told you, that's your job. So that doesn't help, right? Because if you just do what they tell you to do every time, why should they change? Why should they ever care about what you want? Now, I'm not saying not to do what the manager tells you. I don't want you to get fired, you know. There has to be an intermediary. There has to be a way to push back that doesn't threaten the loyalty relationship, but still gets the manager to think about what you want in your job and in your career. Most people feel if they get into a conflict with their boss, as I said earlier, they only have two choices. They can swallow their pride, just go along with it, or they can leave. And both of those are extreme positions that don't accomplish what you need. There is an alternative, but I'll have to warn you, it's a long-term solution and it may not work. I'm not trying to tell you something that's going to work for every case, but it is something to try, and sometimes it works. That's the nice part. It's also better than doing nothing for yourself, because if you just swallow what they give you and you just go along, that feels terrible. You know, it just feels like you're sacrificing your desires and your needs, and there even could be a bit of gaslighting in there, that what you need isn't really that important, what you're objecting to doesn't really matter. No. If you feel that, you should be able to object to it. You know what I mean? If you feel this is important, then it's important to you, and that matters. So pushing back helps even in that sense, even if you don't get what you want. It makes you feel better about yourself, knowing you stood up for your own principles, for your own priorities. So here's the context. In order to get to the mechanism, I'm going to talk about how to do this. I want to point out that there are only two messages that you want to give to your boss, and every interaction with your boss, try to think about it in the context of these two messages. One is, I got this. This is that confidence message. This is the message that says, if you give me a task, I will do my darndest to make it happen. I got this. Now, you may not, that does not mean, oh, sorry, before I get to that one, the other message is the one I mentioned earlier, I got your back. Now, looking at this in a little bit more detail, the I got this message doesn't mean you know everything. Doesn't mean you know how to do every step of every task. It means you'll take responsibility. That you will say, yes, I will find a way. I'll do the best I can. I'll figure out what I don't know. And if I need help, I'll ask for it. Now, how much of that to do and how to play that is something that we learn over time. As you gain more experience, you get better at estimating as you get more experience there. But you're basically saying, this is mine. I'll take the responsibility. I'll do the best I can for it. And I'll let you know when I need help. Now, the I got your back part doesn't mean that you don't argue. But to the outside world, we're a team. And I'll back you up whenever necessary. And incidentally, backing them up means even to their own boss, believe it or not, even though that person's in the chain of command. I'll come back to that. You can count on me to be loyal. If you can pull this off, you become a very valuable person to that manager. Managers need people like that. They value people like that. They'll want to keep you around, and they'll want to keep you happy. That's the goal. Then you can push back because they know you're giving them a lot of what they need. But for example, part of your job is to make your manager look good to their manager. Violate this at your peril. See, the project's a disaster. We're over budget, we haven't accomplished anything, there's all kinds of arguments and recriminations, and everybody's unhappy. Here comes your boss's boss into your office, okay? And they want to know, they say, look, I already talked to your boss, I got their story, I know what they say, I'm talking to all the direct reports, everybody on the team, to find out what you say. A lot of IT people especially, who already have a low regard for management, feel this is their chance, the golden opportunity to tell people what an idiot this guy was and what mistakes they. No. You criticize the budget, you criticize the resources, the project, the schedule, anything except your manager. Because here's the thing, your manager is sitting in their office right now, knowing this interview's going on. Their boss is talking to you, and they have no idea what you're going to say, and they're terrified. I mean, they know this is going to be bad, right? What you are doing is being loyal. You use the word we. We tried this particular strategy. It didn't work. Then we had a meeting, and we discussed all the options and decided to do this. And that didn't work for this reason, that reason, the other reason. So we replanned, and then we did the following. And it's true. I'm not asking you to lie. You are a team. And everybody's going to know, especially the manager's boss, who made the actual decisions. It's not like they're not going to know, you know? And they, of course, are also a manager, therefore very highly value loyalty. They see exactly what you're doing, and they'll like it because the loyalty is so important to managers. It's more important to managers than it is to us, interestingly enough. Now, here is a quick win, an easy way to build a relationship with a manager that has them look upon you favorably. You could start using this tomorrow. And it works also to repair a damaged relationship as well. Just very, very useful. Responsiveness. Respond to requests as quickly as you can, adding whatever caveats you need. You see, here's the thing. Let me give you an example. First of all, I'll give an example from a developer point of view. I use Git for source code control like everybody. And the handful of things I do all the time, yeah, I don't need any help with that. I do them the same way. I know exactly how to do that. And yet, if I have to do something I haven't done in a long time, or I've never done, or I know I have to figure this out, I'm in trouble. And the documentation is notoriously difficult to follow. I'm really in a mess. So I have a friend I email, hey, how do I do this? And then I wait and I wait and I wait, and I'm getting angrier and angrier. You know, I need help. Then I run into this person I emailed in the cafeteria, on a Zoom call, whatever it might be. How come you didn't respond to my email? And they'll say something like, well, I've got 5,000 unread emails. And my thought is, so why didn't you respond to mine? You know, now I may not say that, but I'm feeling it. And imagine how much worse that is coming from your boss. Like, the boss has a question. They send you an idiotic, bizarre question not related to the field you live in. What's hot today? AI and machine learning. Here comes a question from my manager. So how are the advances in AI and machine learning going to affect our primary product over the next 5 years? My immediate reaction is, I don't know. And I'm busy. What are you doing? You know that's not my expertise. Why are you asking me this? So I feel I have two choices. I could just ignore that for a while. That's not what I want to do. Or I can put real work on hold and try to answer that question. That's also not what to do. Here's what you do. Here's the email template for you. You set a little timer. You know, if you're a Pomodoro person, this is 1 Pomodoro. If you're not, 20 minutes, whatever. You say, I don't know, but, okay, here's what I do know. AI and machine learning are growing in popularity. They're very good at pattern matching. They have had some notable successes in natural language processing and image recognition. Looks very favorable for the future, yes. Here's what I think. Well, in our product, we collect some customer data, and maybe we can use an AI module that will allow us to build on our existing data and be better able to answer questions automatically, might save us some things like that. Also, Google has a platform called TensorFlow. Maybe we can adapt that to use our own data, and it'll be a pluggable module in the end. Here's what I think. Here's where I would go to find out. Well, I'd obviously, if I'm going to experiment with that, I'm going to have to learn Python a lot better than I know it, because that's what they use, even though there's other APIs. I'm going to have to dig into some statistics a lot more. I'm going to have to understand some of the basic principles of machine learning, that sort of stuff. And it'd probably take about this long. See, there's the key. That step of the template, that's your rough cost estimate that you're giving the manager to say what it would take to do this right. And then you ask the magic question. Do you want me to look into it? Now you can fire off something like this in 20 minutes on almost any topic that your manager is likely to ask you about. I'll say almost because there's probably some out there you couldn't. But in general, you can get to be really good at responding like this. And I promise you that better than 90% of the time, the response from the manager will be, no, that's good, that's all I needed. And you responded right away to an open-ended request that they weren't even sure they were going to get a reply back from. That always looks good. Everybody feels good when they know that if they contact you, you'll respond. The best developers I know respond right away to email. They do, because it shows, it makes me feel valued. It gets it off their plate. See, that's even the best part about this. That request came in and you got rid of it inside a half an hour and looked good in the process. And you didn't make a decision as to whether to dig into it or not. You left that for the boss, because that's their job to decide whether or not. Because every once in a while they'll say, yeah, you know what, we better dig into this. And then you could say, okay, fine, we better plan what to do with my current projects. That's fine, now you're on the team, see? Very easy to do. You could start using that right away. Took me forever to figure that out. Now, okay. The corollary here, the real message I'm trying to get across, is a good answer today is way, way better than a great answer next week. The problem is, if you come up through educational institutions, come up through school, this is not right. When a teacher in school asks you a question, they have an answer in mind. Also, they want to see it in a certain way, and you are highly penalized for not giving them what they want the way they want it. When a person asks you a question in a company, it's because they're stuck. Anything that gets them unstuck will make them happy. Even if you're throwing in all these caveats and saying maybes and stuff, just the very act of being responsive works. We're just not trained to do that in school. It's something you have to learn in the business world. Okay, now, the I got your back stuff I've already pretty much talked about. We're a team. Now, how do you train your manager to take what you care about into account? Now, I'm going to look at this. This is an old classic. Some of you have already seen it. Robert Axelrod wrote a book called The Evolution of Cooperation. It was written back in the 80s, and this is, I think, the picture of the 9th edition cover, okay? Phenomenal. This book is an investigation of a classic problem in the theory of games, as they say, mathematical theory of games, game theory, called the prisoner's dilemma. This is a snippet taken from Wikipedia page on the prisoner's dilemma, which is pretty extensive, actually. I'm going to try to apply the prisoner's dilemma solution, a solution to the, more specifically, the iterated prisoner's dilemma to the employee-manager relationship, and then you can take with it what you will. The basic prisoner's dilemma goes like this. 2 prisoners are captured for the same crime and interrogated separately so they can't communicate with each other. And they have a choice. They can cooperate with each other by staying silent. If they do, they each serve a year. If one defects and the other stays silent, so if A defects and B cooperates, A goes free and B serves 3 years, and that's symmetrical. Same thing with B defecting and A staying silent. If they both defect, they each serve 2 years. Now, the actual numbers don't really matter, but there's certain inequalities that do. Here's the thing. If you're only going to play this game once, it's actually easy. Say I'm prisoner A, and I go, okay, let's say I have to choose what to do here. If prisoner B cooperates, I either serve 1 year or I go free. Well, I better defect. Wait, if prisoner B defects, I either serve 3 years or 2 years, and 2's less than 3. In each case, I defect. So obviously I defect. That's called, by the way, a Nash equilibrium, if you saw A Beautiful Mind and all of that. So for a prisoner's dilemma, you only play once, you defect. And of course, your opponent will do the same analysis, and you wind up with this defect, defect, defect strategy. And too many organizations fall into that. Every person for themselves, nobody helping out each other. It's really ugly when you get into a case like that. I've been in one. It's hard to break out of. But things change when you play the iterated prisoner's dilemma. In other words, you're going to do this again and again and again an indeterminate number of times. If you know exactly how many, well, the last one you defect and you can work your way back, you know. But if you don't know how many times, it changes everything. So Axelrod had a computer tournament, and he collected programs to play a prisoner's dilemma game against each other a few hundred times. This was the 70s, you know, not even a few million times like it would be now, okay? And everybody was going to come up with strategies and see which one was successful. That tournament was won by a program called Tit for Tat, believe it or not. It consisted of 4 lines of BASIC, believe it or not. And here's the strategy. Cooperate on the first move, okay, that's very important. And then on every subsequent move, do what the opponent did on the previous move. If the opponent defected, then it defects. If the opponent goes back to cooperating, it cooperates. It immediately does whatever the opponent did on the previous move and just follows up indefinitely. Now, this is a very easy strategy for the opponent to diagnose. They figure out, oh, you're doing a tit-for-tat strategy. That's a good thing. You want your manager to anticipate your reactions. That if they do something you don't like, you will push back in a way that doesn't threaten the loyalty relationship. We'll get to that. But then you'll go back to work. You'll cooperate until the next time, see? The idea here is that cooperation, that the book is called The Evolution of Cooperation. Cooperation can emerge naturally as long as both sides remember you're going to do this again and again and again, over and over again. I have a friend, happened to be a woman in this particular case. She was working for a town government in Connecticut. I live in Connecticut. Eastern, not Western. Think Red Sox, not Yankees. Very important. Although I'm still mad at the Sox for trading Mookie Betts for nothing. I'm still mad about that. Anyway, but here's the thing. She got an idea on how to save the town a lot of money. She went to her manager, who happened to be a guy in this case, and she explained it to him, and he said, sounds like a good idea, and gave her the budget, gave her the time, gave her the freedom, and she went and did it, and it was great. It saved the town all kinds of money. So she goes back to him and says, all right, at the next town council meeting, I'd like to go and tell them about it. And was surprised when his response was, I already did that. In other words, he took all the credit for her work. She got nothing. Can you relate in IT? I mean, that's galling to a lot of us, because here's the thing. In higher levels of management, that's normal, or at least not unusual. okay? Normally, managers do take credit for all their lower reports work because the promise is when they get to be the manager, they'll get to do the same. We're not on the managerial track. We're not going to get that opportunity. Also, we're the technical people. Sometimes our manager couldn't even do the work, and they're taking credit for it from us. So it feels galling on multiple levels. So immediately her reaction was, her emotional reaction is, I'm never giving this idiot a good idea again. But that's the defect strategy, and that's going to lose because if she doesn't do her job, her manager will accuse her of not doing her job, and the company will back him up. I mean, after all, it's her job to give the guy good ideas. So instead, she went home, she thought it over, she went back the next day, she went into his office and shut the door, said, look, I'm not happy. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm a manager, and I just got praise from the town council because of work that my team did, even if I think of it that way, and then that person who did the work comes into my office and says, I'm not happy, you got my attention. I'm listening, okay? Really, what's the matter? If he was that clueless, to not even know what the problem is. And then she said, look, I get it. You had the authority on the project. You gave me the budget, you gave me the time. Ultimately, it's your responsibility. That's fine. But I should get something too. And if this guy has a brain in his head, he'll be like, yeah, you're right, what do you want? Now, we'll talk about the case where he doesn't have a brain in his head in a minute, okay? He's going to be like, yeah, what do you want? And it could be whatever is practical in your organization. It might be an award, it might be time off, it might be a bonus. In her case, it was perfect because what she wanted was her choice of projects and the freedom to operate independently like that because she wanted to be out all that politics and he could provide cover for that. And he knew she just demonstrated she was going to be good when she did that. He was like, great. And then, of course, the next time she had a success, he brought her along to the town council meeting so she could answer questions and look good. It worked out. Now that again, that's the happy path, but that's the idea. It succeeds because it favors cooperation. Cooperation always scores better in these games. It never defects first. Now here's the hard part. It retaliates immediately. The pushback has to happen close enough to when the event happened that the manager connects it in their mind with their action. They have to realize this is connected to what I did. And then it forgives immediately as well. Goes, okay, I'm going back to work. That's the key. See, it's really hard to do that the first time. First of all, nobody wants to get into a conflict with their boss because there's a power disparity, and pushing back against someone who has authority over your career, that's scary. But if the message is, look, this is a problem, not a crisis, and I'll prove it by whatever I get out of this, so be it, I'm going back to work, then you have convinced them that this is an issue but not an end of career threatening problem. Also, you've made it clear that you're just letting them know how you feel. It's going to be okay in the long run, no matter how this works out, at least until the next time they do something you don't like, at which point you'll be right back in their face again. But it doesn't threaten the loyalty relationship. You make sure to the outside world it's all fine. That's the idea. The retaliation part is necessary. But it doesn't have to be symmetrical because the job's not symmetrical. It can be subtle, just saying, look, I'm not happy, and this is why. You voice your displeasure privately, you negotiate, maybe you get something, maybe you don't, and then you let it go. Now, this feels bad the first time because you feel like, why am I even saying anything if I'm not getting any reward? Well, you are getting one reward, and that's the self-respect you retain by standing up for what you cared about, by objecting when you felt you were treated unfairly. Just the act of objecting will help, will make you feel better. You're also communicating to the manager what your goals and priorities are, what you want. And that's important. They have to know. They don't guess well. You know, they're not mind readers. They have to know. And you may get something. You never know. They may give you some compensation, whatever it may be. But then you get back to work. Say, look, this is a long-term relationship. We're going to be at this a while. I need you to know how I felt about this. But it's not a crisis. It's just a problem. Now, by the way, in case you want to play around with it, there are many online simulators of the iterated prisoner's dilemma problem. This one's my favorite. It's at ncase.me/trust. It's got sound on it. You might want to turn it off the sound if you're at work or whatever, you know. But it's great, and it goes through all these games, lets you try different strategies, lets you change the weights around, does what's called the Evolutionary Prisoner's Dilemma, where they play a whole bunch of games and then eliminate the lowest performers and repeat the highest. You can see how this works over time. It's really nice. So I recommend that one. And by the way, I'm going to give all these slides to Pratik, and he can make them available however the AJUG recommends doing that. But at any rate, if you feel like playing around with it, this is a great simulator online where you could play around. Now, for the employee-manager relationship, I don't want to think of it as two prisoners who are in competition. If you are in a win-lose game with your boss, you've already lost. Because even if you win, you lose. Remember, what you need your boss for is to be your advocate when you're not in the room. And if you destroy the relationship, they're not going to do that, or they're not going to do it well. You need them on your side. It's about balance, however. The cooperation is that I got this message. I'll figure it out. I'll help. The retaliation I call pushback, because it's not threatening. It's just I'm telling you what's going on with me so you know that I'm not happy, but then I get back to work. That's the forgiveness part of it, to go on. And this is how I would approach the tit-for-tat solution to the iterated prisoner's dilemma when applied to the employee-manager relationship. Now, of course, that brings up the issue. What if the manager refuses to learn? What if they don't get any better, either because they don't agree or they don't care? There could be any number of reasons why they don't go along. Well, remember, this is a long-term strategy. It's not going to win right away. It won't even always work. But it gives you something to try before you just say, I've had it, I'm out of here. Without going to extremes like this. You haven't left, where the whole problem may surface again in another company. And it also avoids doing nothing when you're unhappy. It validates yourself. You can look at yourself in the mirror. I don't know about you, I was always a rather high, the description that was always given to me on my reviews was talented but high maintenance. Okay? I mean, you can imagine, I can't just go along with what they're telling me, but I don't challenge them in public. I try to express my reservations privately. How much to express, how hard to push back, that's your call. That's what you figure out over time with your individual manager. As I say, the first time you do this, it's scary, but you build up a pattern over time in your periodic meetings with your boss so that they understand how serious an issue is, and also you learn what they really care about too and can accommodate. Like that problem I mentioned earlier of, hey, I learned a new framework or a new language. I want to carve off a piece of our project to do it. No, I go to my boss and I say, hey, I went to this meeting, this user group meeting. I learned about this. This is fantastic. And we're already meeting once a week or once every other week, something like that. Hey, I'd really like an opportunity to try this. And then they could say something like, well, let's not do it on our current project. That's on the critical path. But we've got this other project that's a lot less important. Maybe we can do it on part of that. And maybe you could bring along this junior person. We'll make it part of their training. In other words, they're part of the solution now. You're a team. And you work on it together. Now, if they don't follow through, if they don't eventually give it to you, well, you bring it up again and again and again. Because the other thing you're doing is building up evidence that you're unhappy, and you try to deal with it. I mean, if you wind up leaving, then the first thing that happens in the exit interview at HR is they'll say, did your manager know you were unhappy? Did you tell them? And this way you can go, yeah, on this date, and this date, and this date, and this date, and it's clearly not getting any better. I gotta go. You built it up, so you don't even feel bad pointing it out. And by the way, if you've already decided to leave, again, no harm in trying, you know, because sometimes, I mean, first of all, you never want your announcement that you're leaving to be a surprise to your manager. Because if it's a surprise, it means both sides missed their chance to make this work. Neither side had a chance to get anywhere. And here's the thing, sometimes they learn. Believe it or not, it always surprises me when my manager eventually does figure out, oh, geez, I really shouldn't do that to him anymore. Okay, fine. Now, they may do it to you anyway, but have an explanation. That's a stage they go through, you know. But eventually they know, okay, if I do this to this person, I'm going to hear about it. I better know why. And then, of course, you're always deciding on a regular basis, is this relationship a long-term thing? Is this worth salvaging? This isn't a marriage. You're not in here for life. You're here until you find something better or it doesn't work for you anymore. And as long as I'm here, let's see if we could build this relationship so I have an ally. I mean, that's the professional relationship, not the family or the wedding or even the friend, okay? Now, as a corollary, your boss is not your friend. Your boss is not your friend. I hate saying this, but I emphasize it because, I mean, I live this. This is a mistake I made over and over and over again. In fact, I have a friend in the Atlanta area, okay? I used to do a lot of contract work for this guy. Really nice guy. Whenever I'd come into town, we'd go out to dinner, we'd split a bottle of wine, we'd have a really good time. And the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm going, your boss is not your friend, your boss is not your friend, because I know this guy. And if he has to make a decision that'll help his company and hurt me, he's going to do it because he cares about his company. When you think your boss is your friend, there's two traps you fall into. If you think your manager is your friend, the first time they make a decision that goes against you, you're going to be surprised and you're going to be hurt. If your first reaction is, I thought you were my friend, yeah, you fell right into that trap. Okay? The other problem of thinking of your boss as your friend is that you'll tell them things that you would only tell a friend. Boss comes in Monday morning, how'd the weekend go for you? Oh, well, my spouse is unhappy, I'm spending too much time in the office, I'm not spending enough time with the kids and they're getting older, I'm missing the chance. We're working through it, but it's a problem. Well, the boss is sitting here, geez, I was going to offer them this big project or a chance at a promotion. I don't want to add to their problems at home. That's going to require more work and investment. You don't want them thinking about that. You don't want to tell them things that you later have to say, oh, forget I said all that. Yeah, good luck with that, right? Your boss is not your friend. Now, that doesn't mean be unfriendly. You could be perfectly friendly. You want it to be a friendly relationship. And I'm also not saying you go to the boss and say, by the way, you're not my friend. No, you don't have to do that either. There's no reason to be confrontational. The barrier here is internal. I need to protect myself so that when you make a decision that it goes against me, I treat it like a professional decision and not a personal one. I know you're not out to get me. This is just something that fell into your priorities and did not fall into mine. And I don't give you ammunition that makes it look bad professionally as well. You can be friendly without being friends. Of course, your boss is not your enemy either. If your boss really is your enemy, okay, it's time to move on, okay? But in general, and this is something rookie managers sometimes have to learn, it is not in your manager's best interest to see you fail. If you've been on a hiring team for technical people, replacing people is difficult and expensive, and it always makes the manager look bad. I mean, if you say, I've had it, I'm out of here, I'm giving you my notice, and you walk out the door, when that manager goes to their boss, the first question their boss says is, what happened? How'd you let it get so bad? What are we going to do about their projects? Are we going to have to hire? Are we going to have to pay a penalty? I mean, what are we going to do? What's your plan? And if it took the manager by surprise, it's even worse. So the managers learn, sometimes they have to go through this a couple times, but they learn it's not in their best interest to drive you away, even though it sometimes feels like it sometimes. Okay, a couple special cases and then we'll be all done, all right? One is the micromanager. Now this can happen in any field, but it's very common among IT people who get promoted into management. The classic Peter principle of someone who is really good at a job and got promoted into an unrelated job that they have no skills and no training for. Just said, hey, sink or swim. Because after all, that's another thing that happens to low-level managers, especially people who are at IT. IT people are highly valued in an organization. They got promoted into becoming a low-level manager. Low-level managers are a dime a dozen. I mean, when there's layoffs, they're the first round to go, right? We have too many layers of management. They never get rid of the top people. This stuff flows downhill, you know? So they know they're suddenly insecure. They're suddenly vulnerable. What am I going to do now, you know? Well, a micromanager wants to do your job and theirs because they had a technical job they were good at, and now they are in management, and here comes along a task they know exactly how to do or they want to show you how to do, and they'd much rather do that than fight for resources, being the low person on the totem pole, or argue politics, or whatever it might be. So the bad news is you can't fix it because you're not the problem. You didn't even enter into that calculation. It was all on them. But the good news is it may take a while, but it is a self-correcting problem because the manager's peers are going to be saying to them, look, you can't do both. You're making a rookie error from a manager point of view. And eventually the boss's boss is going to call him aside and say, look, I hired you to do this management job. If you can't or won't do it, tell me, I'll get somebody else. Because it's easy to find a new low-level manager. And that usually scares them enough to let go. It won't always work. Again, it can take a long time, especially if they're very well politically connected. But that's a special case I thought I'd mention to you. Okay, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, but you also don't really have any power over it. There's a very risky strategy you could try, by the way, and that's to remind the manager how much time everything is taking. Because all real tasks take time, right? And if they're trying to do your job as well as theirs, they don't have time for that. They don't. And you subtly remind them how much time every step of the process is taking. Eventually, they're like, I got to get back to work, and they may go away. They may. It may not. It depends. I lived with a fear-driven micromanager who would get scared that the task isn't going to get completed and would justify that as the reason to take over. It took me a couple of years of pushing back to eventually get them to leave me alone because I got this. And eventually I wound up leaving anyway, transferred to another manager. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That was early in my career, however, when I didn't know much of this. Okay, another one, the flat organization, Oh, we don't have any managers. Everybody's equal. Yeah, okay, good luck with that. They think it's a feature. But the problem is it shows a very low regard for managerial skills, and those tasks still have to get done. Somebody still has to do the interpreting of the company goals. Somebody has to do performance evaluations. Somebody has to do the budgeting and arguing about priorities. It's still all got to happen. In a flat organization, it's not designed. It kind of congeals, And if you don't even know who your manager is sometimes. Although there's an easy way to find out. If you're trying to find out who has responsibility for something in a flat organization, do it yourself and see who gets mad. It congeals. So in a flat organization, and this is true actually in any organization, whoever makes decisions that affect your career, raises, promotions, plum assignments, that sort of thing, that's your manager. That's the relationship to focus on, regardless of other issues, whether they have the title or not. Flat management works if you have 10 people in the company. I mean, a startup has 10 people. We know who the manager is. They're the owner. If you have 50 people in the company, that's getting really awkward. Once you hit 500, if the money's flowing and everything's going great, you might get away with it for a while. Sooner or later, there's going to be a problem, and they'll have no mechanism to solve it. Look at what happened to GitHub a few years ago when they had a woman leave who was accusing a boss's spouse of harassment, and they had no way of handling that problem. I mean, it was a disaster. And every time they did a PR release, they made it worse. Because they thought they were flat. We don't have managers here, and yet animal farms, some were more equal than others, It was there, it just wasn't labeled. They have managers now, by the way. Of course, now they're a division of Microsoft. Who would have expected that? But anyway. Last one here, working remotely. Seems like a good idea, and we've all been through it for a year now. Now, here's the thing. The tit-for-tat solution to the prisoner's dilemma depends on your boss anticipating your reaction to their decisions. Now, if everybody is remote, you're probably okay, because however they communicate, they'll communicate using whatever the remote mechanism is, a Slack channel, Zoom calls, Microsoft Teams, whatever it might be. If some are remote and some are co-located, that's the danger one, because you must be visible to your manager. You don't want to be forgotten. So you arrange periodic meetings. Now, periodic meetings are good anyway. Every good manager I know has periodic meetings with their direct reports. Only the bad ones try to avoid that out of insecurity or a claim they don't have time or whatever. Until they get in enough trouble, then they establish periodic meetings, They can be virtual. You can do it on a Zoom call, but it's got to be one-on-one, and video's better than voice, and voice is better than email. It should be synchronous in their face where you can see them and they can see you, because then you get all that unspoken information. I mean, they have to know you well enough to know that when you're expressing massive insecurities about this project, they know you, they know, yeah, it's a stage they go through when they're learning, it'll be all right. Or, uh-oh, this is serious, we have to deal with this. You also have to know them well enough to know, okay, they're pushing this, sounds like it's coming from their boss and they're just providing cover for the boss. Yeah, okay, there's nothing they could do about it. That sort of thing. You need to know them well enough, they need to know you well enough. Finally, the best way I've ever found on how to tell your boss they are completely and totally wrong, I did not come up with this, I wish I could remember where I found it, is the phrase, that turns out not to be the case. Isn't that beautiful? That turns out not to be the case. You could throw in, I can see why you might think that, try not to roll your eyes, but that turns out not to be the case. It's way more diplomatic than I think you should sell your house and everything you own and put a down payment on a clue. That's not so diplomatic, you know. But that turns out not to be the case. Feel free to use that even on me. At the end of this, if you don't agree, that's fine. Now, before I go into this summary, let me give you that coupon code. So here's my, my Tales from the Jar side here. Whoops, not in that one. I think it's in the previous one. Let me scroll down to the section on the coupon code, and there it is. Let's see if I can magnify that. So if you're interested, now this is for the book At Pragmatic Programmers. So if I go to PragProg, and the book is here, so this is only ebooks, PDF, EPUB, and Mobi, then use this coupon code, which I can't even write down, but I'll email it to Pratik. This will give you a 35% discount until the end of September, okay? You're welcome to use that, okay? So I'll leave that up there for a moment. And by the way, if you want to become a jarhead by reading Tales from the Jar side, you can subscribe to the, I know, if the first time I get pushback from a real Marine, I'm dropping that title immediately, you know, just so you know, okay? Avoid making your manager look bad. Try not to violate the chain of command. We didn't talk about that, but that's another whole chapter in the book. Don't trash your manager on social media. Now, this group isn't going to do that, but today's kids are growing up expressing their whole lives on social media. I used to tell my son, not that he'd listen, but I used to tell him, maturity is measured by all the funny jokes you think of that you don't tell because it would hurt somebody. Same thing, you know, don't make your manager look bad on social media sites. You'll pay for it. Even if they don't see it, the very act of you saying that out loud changes the relationship, believe it or not. You start thinking they're a problem. Try not to trash your manager inside the organization, of course. Respond right away. I say immediately, but you know, whatever's practical, you know, as quickly as you can. Share credit publicly, knowing that everybody who's good will know who really did the work. Negotiate privately. The stuff about the type has another chapter in the book on communication mechanisms. And of course, remember, that turns out not to be the case, especially if you disagree with all this, okay? Now, as I say, I will send the presentation to Pratik. I'll be happy to take a couple questions. Anything you want to ask about?
All right. Is this on? Okay. Anybody have any questions? We'll wind up.
Comments, words of
Comments,
wisdom, heard any good
questions,
jokes lately?
Anything like that? Actually, one of the first chapters I read was the Prisoner's Dilemma chapter, because I was like, this will probably be pretty good. So I enjoyed reading that one. And I went straight to it because I've seen that happen 1,000 times, right? Especially when working at megacorps.
Yep.
It's like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. So
Is that a question?
No, it's a comment. You said comment or questions.
Or words of wisdom, or heard any good jokes lately?
Yeah, or any jokes. Okay. Anybody
I've
have
got
any?
a couple when when we need
Hold on. Let me get the
Yes.
mic to. Hold on. Let's get this on audio for the live feed.
So in the past, I completely agree with what you've said. I mean, what I appreciate about this book, and I hope people, when they buy it, understand that if they could read this, it will save them about 15 years of pain. So
Yeah,
please,
that's
I
the
think,
gray here.
yeah. I mean, well, I share the same color hair, so. But in one case, I was working at a startup, and we were running out of money. My immediate manager was taking a path that was incorrect. That turns out not to be the case. I went through all that, and so I need you to tell me, it's like, was this the right course to act, or would you find a better way to do it? I had to go to the level above him, which I do not like doing, and I said, we're not going to make it if we continue on this plan, but I don't want you to trust me. I want you to go get somebody else to look at what's going on here? Are there options?
Yes.
And to where I'll put it this way, it is the last thing you want to do is to go skip that level. But is there conditions on that, or does your book cover that? I haven't had a chance to read the book yet.
Yeah, well, it's all right. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I didn't include that in the slides, but there's a whole discussion about the chain of command. And the solution quote or the approach to take with that is if you feel the need to appeal to your boss's boss, you just go through your boss. You say to your boss, look, I think you're wrong here. I mean, I get you want me to do this. I really want to bring this up with your boss's boss. And again, if your boss has any skills whatsoever, their response will be, yeah, fine, I'll go with you. Now, the thing that's going to happen, almost certainly, is your boss's boss is just going to back up whatever your boss said. You're almost certain not to get a good response out of that. However, by going through the chain of command, by bringing it up with your manager, you avoid violating the loyalty relationship. And they, in fact, sometimes, as long as you go back to work and then try to carry things out, they actually appreciate the candor. They like the honesty there, even though they'll be aggravated right away. I mean, they're not going to be happy, of course, being challenged, but as long as they know they're just expressing their opinion and it's not a fundamental break here. That's the key. See, this also applies if your boss's boss wants to work with you, bypasses your boss to work with you directly. I mean, it happens all the time, right? Again, easy thing to do. You go to your boss and you say, hey, the boss's boss is coming into my office. They want to work together. I'm going to work on this project with them. Let me make sure to keep you in the loop. I want you to know what they're saying, what's going on, because that's the relationship that affects your career. You know, I mean, you don't want to say no to your boss's boss, but you don't want to cut your boss out of the loop either. That will have negative consequences. So just make sure they're aware of it as you do it. Go through them rather than around. Because if you don't, see, there's the scary part. See, what we're often tempted to do is say, my boss is wrong. I'm going to appeal to a higher authority, right? That's what I'm going to do. Well, what's your good scenario here? You go to the boss's boss. The boss's boss says, you know what, you're right. I'm going to overrule your boss without telling him you told me to do it. You know what I mean? You think the boss is not going to know who brought this up? Do you think they're not going to be upset about it when they didn't even know you were going to the boss's boss? They're going to be worried every decision they make, you're going to do an end run around them. You go through them rather than around, and when you go through, know that don't get emotional about this because you're going to lose, almost certainly, but it's okay. It's not a crisis again. That's the idea.
All right. Thanks, Ken. Any other questions or comments before we wind up? Okay.
What about both the online people?
Yeah, no,
They're gone.
there's 20 or 30 people online.
Oh, how?
Yeah.
How about that?
So let's give a big round of applause for Ken.
Okay.
That was excellent. The book is good. I'm about halfway through it, and I look forward to reading the rest of it. Coming from someone who is a manager, it is actually still a good book to read. Even, everybody has a manager at the end of the day, and sometimes you manage people, and it's very helpful to understand how people can approach it from both sides, I think. So
that's kind of the subversive thing about it is that most managers like this book because it's telling their employees how to deal with them. In fact, one of the titles that we considered and rejected because it was just funny but silly was How to Employee. So
Yep.
Just a thought.
No, that's good. All right, so we're going to end the live stream now, and we will post the discount code for the book both in the live chat later this evening and also on the Meetup event page for this specific Meetup, along with instructions on how to use the code. Okay? So thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.